Hello folks, my name is Mark, this is Why I Hate the World. So this past May Day, there were a lot of protests around the country, as there are pretty much every May Day, but this time it seemed to be a lot larger, mainly because of Donald Trump, and his election has kind of galvanized the left a little bit, injected some much needed energy into the social justice protests and movement and stuff like that, right? And so there's been some very large gatherings out there in different cities around the country, right? And in a couple of those places it has degenerated into riots, and mainly because of what they call the Black Bloc group, Antifa. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what Antifa is, it's basically it stands for anti-fascist, right? Smash fascism is their thing, and it was started in Germany in the 30s as a response to the Nazi Party, actually, until the Nazis killed them all, right? And it was revived in the late 70s, mid 80s, right around 79 to 85, right around then it sort of came back in Europe, and it's been around in Europe at least for decades. And the first time I remember seeing these guys active in the United States in a major way was probably the World Trade Organization protests in early 2000, right? If you guys remember those, the WTO protests, right? Back then, it was in '99, and it was like '99, 2000. I can't remember the exact year. And what do these guys do? Well, they're kind of the left's response to the skinhead Nazi kind of violent types, right? And that's what these guys do. They protest and they use violence, right? Up to, beginning with vandalism and up to and including murder. Okay? And a lot of people out there are going to give me shit for this, if they see this video, but that's absolutely true. There's been reports in Europe, at least. I haven't heard of any in the United States, but there's been reports of people getting shot in Greece, when they would go up against the Golden Dawn, stuff like that, right? And but at the very least, they're not afraid to use violence, destroying property, destruction, getting into brawls with right-wingers and Trump supporters and stuff like that. And we're starting to see a lot of videos like that, starting to pop up where guys like Richard Spencer are getting punched in the face. Like, well, where did that, who hit him? It was an Antifa guy, right? And then it's coming from the other side too. The Trump guys, the right-wingers are fighting, and they're beating up Antifa people, and and these protests are kind of degenerating into like brawls, right? Because these guys in one, whether or not they instigated or not, they're perpetuating the violence, right? And in a lot of cases, let's be real, in a lot of cases they're the guys instigating the violence, right? At least when it comes to property destruction. Now I don't know if you could, like, a lot of people, there's a debate out there in left-wing circles about whether property destruction can be considered violence or not. Well, I think it is. And I mean, like, you say, like, for example, in the WTO protests, they went and they smashed up a bunch of stores, Starbucks and shit like that, right? And okay, well, you could say that's a protest against a corporate, greed, culture, whatever. Well, what about if you're just a guy that happens to own a store, and you're not a chain store, and somebody destroys your fucking store? And regardless, what about the people that work at the Starbucks? Now you've just smashed their store and they can't work that day. They lose money, So, I mean, it's not even just against, private business owners or small business owners. What about the people that, are directly injured by your actions? If you go and you, like, burn down a frickin' T-Mobile store, the guys that work there don't get paid. The guy that owns the counter doesn't get paid. He doesn't make enough money to pay his rent, right, that month. And, so you're not thinking about that. You're not thinking about that, those consequences of your actions. right? And I think that very well can be, you know, considered violence, right? Maybe not to the same scale as beating the shit out of somebody or murdering them, but I definitely think it's violence, and it can't be allowed. Now, before we go any further, whenever I see somebody like Richard Spencer or, you know, that kind of thing, one of those fucking Nazis getting their asses beat out of protest, I don't feel too bad about that. You know, I don't feel bad about that at all. They go to a protest where they know that there's going to be protesters, you know, left-wing protesters, and they basically, these guys go to the counter-protest. But if you watch them, if you watch the videos of them, if you actually go to these protests and you watch these guys, they're not happy. You know, they basically want shit to start. You know, guys like him. There was another, I can't remember his name now, but another internet personality guy who, if you go on Reddit and search for, God, what was his name? There was something like, it was on the Donald where they said, you know, Steven, whatever his name, punches a commie, something like that. Or another example is One Punch Girl. That's the girl that they're calling, that got punched in the face by this fucking Nazi asshole, and they knocked her down. And all the assholes on the right, and the, you know, all the Trump supporters and the Donald assholes are calling her One Punch Girl, and they went and doxed her, stuff like that. You know, these guys, like, they go there wanting to start problems. You know, the right-wingers, they go there, the Nazis, the right-wingers, the identitarians. These guys go there, they want shit to start so that they can get pictures of it and put it on the internet and complain about how violent the left is, right? So when they go to these protests, they're not shy about getting into fights. And, you know, when they get like beat up or whatever, first off, I don't feel bad about it. It's like, well, you went there asking for it. But number two, it's sort of like, you know, at the same time, we shouldn't indulge their game, I guess is the good way to put it. Because that's exactly what it is. It's a game. See, there's a misconception that going through right-wing circles right now, and it's enforced by corporate media, things like, you know, for example, Fox News, right? You knew they were going to come up in this discussion at one point. There's this misconception perpetuated by these guys, you know, and it gets, you know, it's like a meme almost, that the left is violent because they don't have any ideas. That's the way you'll hear them frame it. So if you go on right-wing radio, if you go on right-wing circles on the internet, you know, the Donald on Reddit or R Conservative or something like that, and if you watch Sean Hannity or something like that, that's the way that they frame these things. They say, well, the left has no ideas, they can't win in a discussion, so they resort to violence. You know, they resort to dirty tricks and violence, and that's how they're framing it. So basically they go there, right, they antagonize people, you know, they start fights on purpose, and then when these Antifa guys indulge them, right, then the way they frame it is, see, the left is violent. And in that sense, the Antifa guys just walk right into their game. You know, they're the ones, and they lose because the right-wingers control the media. Okay, the right-wingers control the message, you know, and, you know, they have the largest, you know, cable news network with the largest amount of viewers. Okay, they're framing the discussion. So, you know, so that's one aspect. That's one reason why you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't indulge them. The other reason is, like, you know, just violence in itself is a losing proposition. Okay, you can't win. All right, you know, you can't fight the system with violence because they'll kill you. There's no way to get around it. You can't defeat, you know, the government with guns. Put it that way, right? You know, so, and I can, you know, we can look to history for examples of this. Like, if you look at the civil rights movement, you know, you had one wing, the Martin Luther King peaceful march wing, that would go out and they'd get they get beat up and they get hoses and dogs turned on them, right? And they wouldn't fight back. And then you get the other side, the Black Panther guys, who would go out armed and shit like that and get into shootouts with cops, you know. Well, both of those were basically wings of the same movement. But one side, the Martin Luther King side, was extremely effective. And what happened, you know, those were the guys that got the Civil Rights Act passed, right? And, you know, the other guys, the frickin' Black Panthers, all got murdered and put in jail. Well, why is that? You know, because the public turned against the Black Panthers. Okay? That's why. Because you need to, you know, if what's the reason why you go on these protests in the first place? Because you want to affect change, right? Well, you can't force the change. Okay? You can't just protest, and then suddenly everything changes. No, that's not how it works, you know. The reason why you protest is to bring attention to issues so that you can get laws passed, right, and you can affect social change through the system. That's the reason why you do it, okay? There has to be a goal in mind, and that's the goal, all right? Because you're not going to just protest and then suddenly everyone's going to start doing what you want. No, you have to work in the system we have, all right? And when you're on TV and you're on the internet and you're being the ones who are the victims of oppression, you know, when people are beating you up, right? When the cops are macing you, pepper spraying you, and you're non-violently not doing anything, the image that comes into the mind of the public is that these guys don't deserve the way they're being treated, right? The public will side with you. That's what happened during the, you know, that's why the civil rights era was effective, okay? Because images of those people being, you know, with fire hoses and dogs and cops with fucking clubs beating them got out into the media, the public got behind their cause, and then lo and behold, civil rights was enacted, okay? The other side doesn't work that way. When you fight back with violence, the public turns against you, all right? The Black Panthers were, I mean, if you go back and look at the way the media treated the Black Panthers, they were definitely the enemy. They were revolutionaries, right? And the media didn't try to hide the fact that these guys were criminals, you know, because technically they were. Whether or not you believe in their, you know, if you believe in their cause, that's one thing, but they were basically breaking the law, you know, they were firearms and like shooting a cop and shit like that, you know. I mean, of course there's cases where it didn't really, you know, they were set up and all this other crap. You know, we can make a video about that, you know, because I personally think that they were like, you know, really, the whole Black Panthers thing was a travesty of justice, but that's a subject for a different video. But that doesn't matter. What matters is the way that the public perceived them. You know, the public perceived them as criminals, right? And that's why there wasn't any protest when, you know, they were all thrown in jail and shot and shit like that, right? Well, that's what's happening now. See, the fucking, you know, Fox News guys and the Donald and the right-wing media and the right-wingers on Reddit are trying to frame these protests in that manner by saying that the Antifa guys, the black bloc guys, are, you know, violent, and they're trying to frame them as criminals and the enemy. And, you know, if we keep indulging them, it's gonna work, okay? And before you know it, the entire movement is gonna be smeared with that broad brush, okay? And, you know, you'll be considered, and you'll lose. You'll lose. You won't get any change done, and your entire movement is gonna like peter out and die when the public turns against you. That's what it's all about. It's all about, you know, getting the public behind your message, and that's the way shit's gonna change. You don't get that. That doesn't happen when you go out smashing windows, when you go out and you beat the shit out of people, when you fucking murder people like they do in like Greece, you know, against the Golden Dawn, shit like that, you know. So that's why, and I can't get behind him, okay? I mean, like I said, you know, I don't feel bad when, like, some Nazi dickhead gets fucking, like, you know, smashed in the head. I'm not shedding any tears over that guy. But at the same time, I'm not going to go up and shake the, you know, go up to the dude who did it and shake his hand. That's bullshit, you know. It needs to, on principle, at least, I have to stand against them because they're counterproductive. And it, you know. So anyway, that's all I got today. Adios, folks.